I know this video is a little later than usual. I am not going to apologize. I just got back from Gallifrey 1 and it was awesome. Don't worry, there'll be as complete a video recap as I can do of Gallifrey 1, though that will probably go up in the break room. You'll get notice when it goes up. But for right now, we need to talk about the latest episode of Doctor Who, The Haunting of Villa Dipenda thing. I can't remember exactly what it said, and I don't remember them ever saying it in dialogue, so I am not going to look it up because I'm lazy. So, this was an interesting one. Partly because of my experience of watching it, which was that, I think I'm allowed to say this now, they asked us to not send it out on social media initially, but we actually got it screened at Gallifrey 1 as the lead up to the closing ceremony. So I got to watch it in this massive room surrounded by, God, I don't even know how many laughing, hollering, gasping, cheering Doctor Who fans, which... Look, if you gotta watch an episode of Doctor Who, I highly recommend that way of doing it. Now, one could consider that maybe that colors my opinions in a positive direction, and I will put that forward as a possibility. But then again, I'm also going to have criticism. So I don't think that is going to influence me too much one way or the other. But let's talk about this thing. So we've got another historical set episode. The historicals... this series, and honestly, if I'm gonna level with you, the historicals of the Chibnall run in general have worked better for me way more often than the historical episodes usually do. Not always, and I do have various issues with some of them, but I no longer have the dread going into a historical episode with a celebrity historical figure that I used to in the Moffat and Davies era, because I really didn't like the over-congratulatory feel and the format of those. I never really cared for them. I'm enjoying the historicals quite a bit during the Chibnall period, so if nothing else, I feel like he's doing those at least consistently better. So I suppose that's something I've got to give the guy. So this is set, ostensibly the night that Lord Byron... Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, and two other people whose names I don't remember because I don't know enough about history. And again, I'm not going to look it up because I'm lazy. All are trading ghost stories, and they basically dare each other to come up with the scariest story they can, and Mary Shelley goes and writes Frankenstein. So that's our starting setup, that's the events that we're coming in on. But things don't go quite as planned, which is part of what I like about this as a historical piece. I don't like when the historical set pieces feel more like a walking tour of a major figure's life. I would say the weakest historical of the Chibnall era was The Witch Hunters, because it read a lot of times like a Wikipedia entry on King James. You know, interesting guy, but they couldn't find a way to weave him into the story. He just kind of shows up and we get an info dump on him. This felt much more integrated. We get to see the dynamics between these people. We get much better sense of them as people as opposed to simply historical figures, which I thought was cool. The performances were all good. I liked the vibe on this. Doctor Who, you know, it can try for scary and often does. I do like the gothic horror when Doctor Who goes for it, and it doesn't go for it as much in the modern era. There were chunks of classic that are very gothic, and I like that feel in this. I like the use of illogical architecture. You know, you exit a door in a room, and you come back in right into the exact same room. I like that sort of stuff, and it's well presented visually here. They did a really good job with, you know, the little flashes of light, and ooh, did I see something that you want to have in anything that is ostensibly a ghost story. So props for there, nicely presented. I really enjoyed Fletcher, who was, I want to say Butler. He said some other title, which I didn't quite catch and don't know what it was, so forgive me for getting that. I'm sort of shrugging my shoulders and giving up on getting a lot of specific details right. I'm starting to feel bad about that, but I'm still going to plow ahead. I loved him. There's so much personality in that guy. Just the way he reacted to these wealthy, spoiled people around him, and just this look of, Especially when he gets told, not asked, told he's going to be a second in this guy's stupid, superfluous duel he's suddenly decided he's going to do, and he's just back there. I love that guy so much. That's going to come back around, though. Hold on to that. So, once we get into, and I would give a spoiler warning, but like I said, I'm getting this review up a little bit later than I normally would, so I would think everyone who really cares has already seen the thing, but consider that your warning anyway. My feelings are overall very positive, and I'm about to start talking about the specifics that were a bit of a surprise when they showed up. So here we go. The Lone Cybermen. I did think that was going to somehow come up in this one, because I figured, Doctor Who has tied Cybermen to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein before. They did it in Big Finish with, I think it was actually a couple of Eighth Doctor stories. I haven't actually listened to those ones yet, but I know they exist. So that link has already been explored to some degree in Doctor Who, and, that just felt like something that would get planted here to set up the two-part, presumably two-part finale that we're heading into. But I expected it to play a bit like the Master reveal at the end of Utopia, which is a tag at the end to lead us into the next thing. It was a bit more integrated into the story here, because the Cyberman, or at least what he's after, is the primary cause of what's going on in the first place, so there's that. And then he shows up a lot earlier into the story than I would have expected. Oh, and you should have heard the cheers go up in the hall when a Cyberman showed up. I really like this Cyberman. So, there's a couple of things I really like about this. I would never want what we see here to become the standard of Cybermen, which is part of why I like that he's all busted up and you get the sense this is not standard, this is not what they're supposed to be like, which is part of why I was able to just roll with it and really enjoy him. I like the idea that he is converted enough to be following directives, but they haven't gotten all the emotional inhibitors gone. He gets frustrated, he gets angry, he has glee in presumed victory. I like seeing those kinds of emotions come out of a Cyberman, and I really kind of dig that idea. And also, it really makes me, this is like a headcanon-y thing I'm about to talk about, but I liked that it made me think this. It made me think because generally if the emotional inhibitors don't work, what we've seen is that the entire Cybermen apparatus breaks down. It either stops functioning or it freaking blows up. So to have someone who the emotional inhibitors are still working, still towing the line and following orders, it makes me wonder in interesting ways, what kind of person was this guy that even with his emotions intact, he's not rebelling? And that's me filling in blanks, and maybe that's projecting more depth onto him than is actually supposed to be there, but I liked thinking about that. I enjoyed that. There was a really interesting moment. Now, I've heard more than a little bit over the last two series, people talking about there being some sort of chemistry between Yaz and the Doctor. And I'm not going to say that I didn't see it at all, but I was kind of like, I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. There was a nice moment here that I actually quite enjoyed for its sort of starting to deliver on the idea of that, while having it be a moment rooted in character and rooted in a character interaction, which is Yaz relating to this woman who, has a thing for Lord Byron, because why wouldn't you? And she says, I know someone too who's like that. The more you find out, the less you know. And it's never said explicitly that it's the Doctor. It's my hope that that'll be made a little... Let me back up. I don't actually ship the two of them. I don't want them to actually become a couple. But, if we're going to do anybody has a crush on the Doctor, I'm okay with it being Yaz. I do hope that if that is where they're going, they'll at least confirm slightly more explicitly, because while I think it's hard to say that she's talking about anybody other than the Doctor, there's right now the opening for people who wish to believe that maybe she's thinking about Ryan, or there's also the conspiracy nuts who seem to insist that she's talking about the Master, because they think she's somehow a secret double A. I don't buy that theory. For the record, I really don't. But until we get confirmation, that's going to be in the air as well in the fandom. But I did like that moment. And I like that it felt like a natural, organic, her connecting with this other woman, doing something that is a police technique, to find a way to connect with someone who you're basically trying to talk down from something. Now, granted, she's not like trying to talk her off a ledge. She's just trying to, help her gather herself. But it made sense for her to talk about that. It did not feel shoehorned in at all, and I liked that moment quite a bit. So towards the tail end, there was one key moment I did not like at all, and this is going to sound weirdly nitpicky, but it really did bother me heavily. And I have a feeling I'm one of the only people who's going to be bothered by this, or at least going to be bothered by this in the way that I'm bothered by this. That happens sometimes. And also, it's like cushioned in the middle of a moment that I otherwise liked. So let's talk about the Doctor herself. I feel like we're getting some interesting glimpses at what it is she's kind of been avoiding showing, because she's been squirrely with her companions about how much of herself she reveals to them. And that's not actually new. I didn't really notice it previous series, but I definitely noticed it this series. And looking back, like, she was kind of dodging stuff a bit last series. And I feel like we started to get a glimpse at what is behind her evasions, the anger that is there, the the fire that can be unleashed. And, when she laid into Ryan, and when she said, this is not a flat team structure, this is a mountainous pyramid, and I am at the top. That was a harsh moment, and I found it to be a really interesting one coming from this Doctor in particular, especially at this point in time. However, in the middle of that moment, where she's arguing with everybody about whether or not they're going to give the lone Cyberman what it wants, because obviously most of the companions are arguing, no, you can't do that, Doc. Jack said not to do it. And Doctor, again, great little moment, Jack's not here, is looking at Percy Shelley going, I don't think I can condemn this one person to death, which is a stance and a decision that's very consistent for the Doctor. That's a decision the Doctor has made repeatedly across incarnations. The saving of who is here now at the risk of others later, in the hope that in preserving their own conscience, they will be able to stop whatever they may have inadvertently set in motion in the meantime. That's very Doctor-ish. But there was something about the specific wording of her defense of that choice, particularly when she was shouting down Ryan. Because Ryan made the point, it's just one man weighed against billions. Now, I didn't expect the Doctor to not argue that point with him. Again, because that's the side of the debate she's always landed on. She argued the point that the Doctor's consistently argued. But when she started going off on how valuable Shelley was, and how valuable his works were, and how his words inspired, and how if he dies, there are ripple effects that could change the entire world that Ryan comes from. Now, I don't have a problem with her pointing that out in general, but I do have a problem with the context of that being pointed out in this specific story. And remember how I said we were going to come back to Fletcher? Well, here's where we're going to come back to him, and also to the maid. Because I had the thought earlier in the episode, I like how much more fleshed out the Fletcher and the, I don't know if she was a maid or a wet nurse or both, but the woman who tried to hide the baby, how much more fleshed out they were, and that initially I thought maybe they're not even going to kill them, because they're fleshed out and I'm really enjoying the presence. They did both end up dying, but I did appreciate that it felt like it was given more weight than the death of secondary characters often are in Doctor Who. But something really, really irked me, that in a story that has already killed 2 people, that the Doctor's going to make this big argument about how you can't let Percy Shelley die because of the ripple effects. Now, obviously the Doctor couldn't prevent the death of those other two people, but the fact that it felt to me like the episode was using her to make its point, which again is something typical of Doctor Who even prior to this. Freaking hell, look back at the Zygon inversion speech again. But there's something about two people have died. There has been no mention whatsoever about their importance, their impact on the world, their loss. But we have to stop and point out how important Percy Shelley is. His words, whatever, because he's the important historical figure. And there's something that rang very hollow about the Doctor making the every life is important argument in defense of the famous historical poet, and not even a passing mention of the people who had already died, which, while not explicitly, implicitly labels them as unimportant. And this show's habit, again, going back way before Chip, going back to the freaking classic era, this show's habit of very casually killing off, for lack of a better term, the servant class is really starting to bug me. And it really came to a head in this one. And more to the point, when she said, you know, words matter, had I been watching it alone, I would have sworn at the screen. And it's not because I don't believe that sentiment, and I'm going to have to clarify this really specifically, because I've said in the past that I like stories about stories. I like stories about the power and the strength and the importance of stories and storytelling. However, there's an asterisk on that, which is I am very over the aggrandizing and placing up on a pillar of the author. I like things about the value of stories. I don't like things that basically put an author, a writer, on a pedestal as being more important, more valuable, more influential, more inspirational. And I say that as somebody with aspirations of writing. And it's not because writers aren't influential, but it really bothers me in things like this because it feels, that specific line to me felt less like something the Doctor was saying than something the writers were saying. And when writers are aggrandizing the role of the writer, that's masturbatory. Writers can aggrandize the power of stories without necessarily praising the existence of the writer themselves. But they didn't do that. They failed to not do that here. So many contradictions, but you can tell I'm frustrated by that. And it's just so patting on the back. Writers are important. It was, and it annoys me how annoyed I am, because it was a relatively small moment in an episode that I otherwise honestly really enjoyed. I loved the vibe. I thought the performances were great. Graham had some awesome moments. I like that we got an acknowledgement of Ryan's dyspraxia, which I feel like we haven't had explicitly brought up in a while, so it was nice to get that reestablished. There's a lot that I like. I like the idea that Time Lords can I must presumably have this power of themselves, and like she kind of grants it to Shelley, sort of roll forward in their own timeline to see how they die. Like, that's an interesting wrinkle. I buy it. Like, that's neat. And I'm really curious to see how this sets up to where things go in the finale. There's so much I like, but just this friggin' little nugget of failing to acknowledge the death and the loss of anyone other than a writer who doesn't die, at least not in the story, and also explicitly calling out the value of writers. So, like, anybody, because I know there are some people who watch my channel with aspirations of authorship. Yeah, just don't do that. I'm not saying you can't think that about you and your writing or whatever, but don't put it in the text. Please. It's so self-indulgent. And those were two moments that came basically back to back that really bugged me in an otherwise very enjoyable episode. Like I said, it bothers me how much it bothered me, because I'm pretty sure I spent more time talking about this, like, a minute worth of stuff than the entire rest of the thing. And I liked almost the entire rest of the thing. Oh, well. That's what you get for being a nitpicker when tiny things really latch into you. But the Haunting of Villa de Timpedede. What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something on down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Bunch of stuff to do besides. You know all the things. Like and subscribe and share this and support me on Patreon if you feel like helping me pay my bills. That is immensely appreciated. That was how I was able to afford to go to Gallifrey 1 in the first place. So, yay for that. But, you also don't have to do any of that because end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.